Welcome back, everybody. I am Sean LaFlock. I'm here with Scotty Hagman. This is Conversations, Fitness, Wellness, and Longevity. Scotty, how goes it?
Hey, going good. I'm outdoors this time.
You are looking like you might be riding a little bit right now there, Scotty. Is that
Yeah,
right?
this is the riding lot. Yeah, Joe and my son are out there riding.
Good for you.
So yeah,
Looks beautiful
just
out there.
wrapped up. It's pretty nice. Yeah, it's cool today. It's maybe 73 or 4. Pretty nice.
That is pretty nice. If you're wondering why I'm all raspy, I just spent the last week in the New York area, staying in Connecticut. I was at a lacrosse camp that I've been doing for the last, or actually for about 14 years, on and off. But when I was 18, this is where I started, and I've been going back up there over the last 2 years now. And I do a camp from about 9 o'clock to about 2 o'clock each day in my hometown, and then I'm kind of free for the rest of the day. But my mentor and employer, Paul Carcaterri, invited me up to a lacrosse showcase at Western Connecticut University with some of the best, sophomore, freshman, and eighth graders in the country for lacrosse. And he came. I came up there to teach them certain things about recovery because
Mm-hmm.
these kids are playing probably like 6 games in 2 days, and recovery is a huge part of that. And at that point when they're in eighth grade, we're looking at 14 years old. They really are, I think, probably doing their most growing or starting to get into their biggest growth spurt. So it's
Mm-hmm.
super, super important to start ingraining some of those habits right then so that they're able to maintain ranges of motion throughout the rest of their, you know, sport career. And it's amazing that you look at those kids, and some of these kids are already well over 6 feet tall at 14 years old.
Wow.
And
Yeah.
you're already seeing the backlash of that. Some of these taller kids, whenever you ask them, like, all right, where do you usually have most of your, uh, you know, problems? They're all like lower back and that kind of stuff. So they're
Mm-hmm.
already compensating overusing lower back muscles to keep themselves upright and moving dynamically. So it was
Yeah.
a pretty cool experience, and definitely something that I'm going to kind of look back on and analyze and look at and hopefully move forward with, um, you know, in the short term and long term to create, especially in this kind of niche that is lacrosse, more or better recovery, warm up, and overall training practices for these types of athletes.
Very cool. Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I saw the clips of you there. I didn't know exactly what the scenario was. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's pretty cool looking at the varying types of athletes from sport to sport and how the body responds and what the demands are of it. So if you look at a sport like lacrosse versus maybe something like baseball versus something like football, there's such immense differences of how they train those types of athletes or how those athletes perform their sport, but there's not that much variation as to their training programs.
Mm-hmm.
You look at lacrosse players; they pretty much train like football players. But unless you're a quarterback, there's very little rotational components within football. Um,
Right.
but upper body rotation, obviously, there's hips and dynamic movement like that.
Yeah.
But I think that's an especially big part of that, and you kind of got to almost shy toward more of a baseball type concept for lacrosse players. You know.
I could see that. Yeah. There's definitely. Yes, the elements for sure, kind of between the two, but the upper body rotation piece being a big one.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily just because they want to necessarily shoot harder or whatever, but I think even the techniques are limited based upon their ability to rotate the trunk while keeping their midline stable. You know,
Hmm.
I put up a video
Yeah.
the other day of just like a basic quadruped rotation, and most of those kids can't keep like an expanded posterior mediastinum, let alone actually rotate from that position. So they end up getting a lot of just lumbar rotation and overuse.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but definitely some good times there, and I got to hear from a couple of high level college coaches who have won national championships, and talk with some parents and coaches and that kind of stuff. So definitely a really cool experience, and hopefully I can expand on it. And I think in general, I think this might be something that not only like lacrosse camps but football camps and any other sport camps can integrate into the general curriculum, is getting experienced strength and conditioning coaches in there and working with the kids on their warm-ups, their cool downs, general practices that would prepare them for sport, but then maybe even nutritional practices as well.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, big ability to make a nice impact. Yeah, I think that's awesome. I know, and got to be something really rewarding too about kind of going back to a sport you know and love, and helping with the development of the future of that sport.
Yeah, man, definitely. I mean, I barely picked up a stick the entire week, but I know that I was doing a lot more good just by kind of explaining things to kids and having them see the big picture. And it was interesting because each of my recovery sessions that I did about like a 20-minute kind of intro recovery session, maybe 25 minutes. And the first like few minutes, I actually had them do some observing of breath for about a minute,
Mm-hmm.
because it's
Mm-hmm.
very this the idea of either mindfulness or presence for kids this age almost is non-existent. But as we both know that recovery doesn't happen when you're in the fight or flight state. Recovery happens when you're actually kind of decompressed and that kind of thing. So when you're getting done with a game and now you're like, all right, I got to play in 3 hours, you can't just like jump into bed and just be like, all right, cool, it's gonna be fine. You kind of have to like shift gears and downshift to allow your body to kind of get into that recovery state. So it was no surprise that they had a hard time observing their breath for a minute, but it was just kind of planting the seed and seeing where it goes from there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think you've talked about that before as well, Scotty, after workouts, especially with some of your clients and members, about like kind of just doing some breath work. Is that right?
Yeah, I really move that direction. In many cases, I write it in, my training programs for people. A lot of times, it's different. I may RX different things based on how long, what someone's CO2 tolerance already is, but definitely some sort of, parasympathetic reactivation. Some simple ones are, go out and walk, breathing nasally, hold your breath for 3 to 5 seconds, nasal breathing recovery, repeat for 5 minutes. Other ones we might just do sitting in various positions in the gym. Um, yeah, a lot of different methods there, but that all starts by getting control of the breath and jump starting that parasympathetic state.
Yeah. Um, I think that as the information and as these practices get a little bit more widespread, I just think you're going to get so many more people buying into this, and I think that could potentially have a ripple effect throughout, you know, not only sport but society. If people are actually understanding that if you slow down, it's going to have a significant benefit
Mm-hmm.
for you. So, we're always looking for like the magic wand to like change everything, but I think something as simple as like teaching people how to be present for just a short amount of time could be immensely beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh,
So,
good
you've
job.
been working on some new tricks there, Scott.
Yeah, I got in my, made second round of that contest. It was a 2 month window to develop 30 seconds of new things. So I ended up getting 4 different things down. So just got it all done and sent off yesterday. Finished the last one yesterday morning, and so 2 days before the deadline. So just gonna have a relaxing writing session here, writing more normally.
Yep.
So what ends up happening is outside of a very quick warm up, you just basically work on these things you can't do yet
Yep.
all you know all day every day. So there's a lot of tricks, the basic stuff, normal stuff for me. I haven't even done much for weeks, if not longer.
Let me ask you this, Scott. Is there any like limitations in the capacity for you to create and imagine new tricks?
No, I have way more ideas than I think I could ever learn. I've got a bunch of them kicking around from years ago. I'm going after some of them, but others of them I've gone off on various other tangents and haven't come around to them yet. So there's, I think it's really endless. you would think after, almost 40 years of the sport being in existence that people would be running out of ideas, but there's absolutely not. I mean, I'm taking a little bit of advantage of, the flexibility and my mobility and strength in weird positions, doing
Mm.
things that I don't think a lot of people could do because they won't have trained that. Um, so that's one of the things I've been doing, not just doing the planche, but various other spinning positions that require. This one that I did for this event basically had me in a very deep knee over toes pistols while spinning. Well, basically a
Wow.
single leg stiff legged deadlift, then dropping down into all while balanced, on one wheel and spinning. And then I did so many reps. I was pretty sore. I didn't do any leg training. I was only leg training for a while.
Do you find that just like for people who ride for a while, like from a very young age, Scott, do you find that they have the capacity to do some of those movements just because they're exposed to the sport?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, a lot of this stuff that I later realized was not difficult for me. The difficulty even otherwise good athletes have in getting a pistol, for example.
Yeah.
And whereas I was like, oh, I've never seen that before, and I just did them. I literally first try, and even when I first started working out, I didn't know that most guys don't just have 6 to 10 strict pull-ups
Mm.
for their first days in the gym, because I did from all the pulling that you do on a BMX bike. I didn't realize that was weird. So it does build definitely like pulling, movements, benefits, and then just leg strength in a variety of planes of motion. Of course, you're missing certain things. There's definitely some pushing, like dip support. Dips aren't too hard. There's things where you support yourself on your arms almost entirely, or entirely in some cases. But there's not a lot of pure pushing. It's more support strength.
Yep.
And then torso has to be flexible, but you're not carrying much load through it. So you don't see guys typically able to lift a lot in like squats or deadlifts straight out of the get go.
Yeah.
They don't have the spinal strength. But that's what I've seen with the guys I've worked with. I worked, with some number of people, including an X Games champion at one point, and it's kind of the same thing across the board. You see. Interesting thing. There was actually published research that came out this year on the um, strength levels of your average BMX freestyle pros. Now, this isn't flatland like my specific discipline, but they actually got enough guys in and tested, like squat 1RM, vertical jump, bench press, all these things. So that was really kind of pretty cool and interesting to see.
No kidding, really.
Yeah.
And what were some of the findings there, Scott? Was it something? Well, let me ask you this: were you surprised at what you saw?
They weren't low, but they weren't high for sure. I was pretty much right in there on almost all of them, which was kind of funny. Um, and I had no idea what they were. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, if you're interested, I'll try and dig it up for you.
Yeah,
But
man, I'll take a look at that. That's actually really cool. So, that
there's
remind.
actually a guy.
Go ahead.
There's actually an exercise phys guy at Stanford, I think, that is a BMX racer, has some interest in the sport, and he's kind of spearheaded some actual research and stuff going into it now. It's kind of interesting.
That's really cool. I like it when there's someone who has a little bit of uh, awareness of the sport, and then they kind of go into it with that in mind, because you're always going to get some more profound data, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and then you can take a look at those numbers. I immediately had ideas about, well, okay, I can see maybe where, how we would want to bias some training, potentially, if assuming you had one of those athletes and they fit that profile.
Yep. It actually reminded me, Scott, of while I was in at camp. So I'm working with the goalies, and being a goaltender is actually a very different position as opposed to a field player in the sport. So it's not probably too far off from, let's say, like a hockey goalie.
Mm-hmm.
But instead of using a stick, you're using like a stick with mesh, right? So there's a
Oh
little bit
yeah.
more emphasis on saving it with your stick, but there is a lot more body movement and explosive movement and that kind of stuff. And traditionally, when you look at lacrosse, you are you're just basically doing the techniques. But when I'm looking at these younger athletes, I'm like, well, the reason why you can't do those techniques properly is because you don't move well. So now I'm
Mm-hmm.
seeing it with a completely different light. And the first thing that we did was we sat down, got into a 90-90 position, and worked on 90-90 hip switches. And that's the first thing that we did with
Mm-hmm.
these kids. And again, laying a foundation down and giving them some tools to use in their sport specific warm ups. So,
Yeah.
and then from there, training explosive power on the step laterally, because that frontal plane motion is huge for goalies in terms of saving the ball. But most of them are unable to
Mm-hmm.
access the floor to drive off the leg. So training that is something that they actually have to do to make their sport even better.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome.
I
Yeah.
would I would imagine that there's probably not too much difficulty in like or referencing the floor in a sport like BMX. Do you find that that's true, Scott? Just because you kind of have to feel the pedals and be able to move
There's
the
a
bike off the floor. You know what I
hmm
mean?
Yeah, yeah. I haven't seen people have too much issues with that. It's like, even yeah, yeah. You're so used to interacting with a dynamic thing below you
Yep.
as opposed to in front of you or above you or whatever that the floor is rather second nature. And then I think the knee and ankle and strength from is really pretty incredible.
Yeah.
That was something I didn't realize um, until more recent years. I mean, just the amount of unstable and angular and switching and controlling, and in decades, I can hardly ever think of anyone rolling or hurting their ankle. And
Yeah.
a sport you think would be destruction for the ankle. So I think it builds it,
Yep.
and so then it allows like these various positions, to be floor-based positions as well.
Yeah, it really kind of makes the joints bulletproof down there a little bit, just because you have to be that in order for you to maintain the sport.
Hmm.
It's really interesting. Does your kid ride BMX?
Yeah,
Oh, there's
he was
Scott.
riding around here during the first half of this. This is say hi. Oh, water spill.
That's awesome. And when he rides, do you find that you see versions of yourself in him, and he kind of copies kind of what you do?
I think that'll come along.
Yep.
We're still in the pretty basic phase, but
Learn how to
um,
ride in general.
yeah. And I'm being mindful not to. Oops, careful, buddy! Don't pull out my headphones. He's sitting here with me. Mindful not to push, you know, to complicated
Yeah,
stuff too early before a base has been developed. So
that's very
there's actually
interesting.
there's actually some schools for riding in Japan in particular, but also in France. There's some young kids that are really good. So
That's pretty
it's
cool.
definitely possible. I think if you lay the right foundation, and they actually go back and start with some of the real basics that most of the guys that are older and wilder. I mean, you could be talking guys in their late 30s at this point.
Hmm.
Started and blew all over those just because they started with whatever was cool at the time,
Yep.
rather than some of the true basics. So these schools actually have you go back and really get those bike control from very static positions.
Mm. Yeah, it seems the more I kind of look at the sport, um, it's almost like Cirque du Soleil gymnastics, just because of the isometric contractions that you have to have on certain areas, but then also
Oops.
dynamic movement in other areas at the same time.
Yes. Yeah, there's definitely a lot of isometrics like support legs or arms. Here, let me get his helmet on.
Yeah, no worries.
Just 2 seconds here. Let me set you aside for just a second. We can keep chatting though. You just
Go
won't
right
see
ahead.
me here. I
Yeah,
need to get a.
um, do you find that that's what maybe one of the reasons why you kind of like gravitated toward gymnastics when you started getting into functional fitness training?
I think it was because it had a set of skills that had difficult progressions, right? Like if you want to get, a muscle up, you have to have pull ups to a good
Yep.
degree. You have to have the false grip. You have to have bar dips, then ring dips. and then finally you get a muscle up, hopefully, but then that's not the end of the road, right? You want them stricter, or you want to be able to put them in sequences, and
Mm-hmm.
it's endless. And if I often said this to people, that that it felt just like writing, and that it was layers of skills, and you could create things,
Yeah.
and I think that was why when I was only writing once every month or two, there during a lot of the earlier gym years, it was that kept me kind of going, because it
Mm-hmm.
was the same feeling. So yeah, I think so, and it's kind of cool that that was my original idea. How I found CrossFit was trying to do. I thought some gymnastic training might actually help on the bike, and that was how I found CrossFit. Way back
Ah.
pre-affiliate. Way back in the very early
Yep.
web page days.
Yeah. 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 So, switching gears and kind of, finish up for today is now I'm getting back to, regular life, and I'm noticing that, I'm severely sleep deprived over the last week or so, Scott.
Oh yeah, I bet.
What are some of your strategies that you use when you are, away, time changes, jet lag, whatever they might be? Do you have certain things that you go to for your to get back into the rhythm of your everyday life?
Uh, yeah. I mean, I guess um, I think grounding is something I've tried to do if it isn't the dead of winter. So getting out, bare feet
Mm-hmm.
in wet grass or the beach or something. Kind of, there's some research that will resets your circadian rhythm from a different time zone.
Mm-hmm.
So I've tried to do that both when traveling, if at all possible. Um, breathing, kind of parasympathetic breath, doing some cadence breathing in the evening before bed is something. And then I typically try to do something to kind of ramp the system down nutritionally, actually salt, a little bit of protein. Orange juice has been often a go-to kind of evening. Not a massive amount by any means, but um, that and potentially collagen or glycine,
Mm. For
because they ramp the system down.
okay,
Yeah.
kind of switch it over into a more parasympathetic state, just because being in a sleep deprived state, you're kind of almost in a fight or flight state.
Yeah, yeah. Generally, I don't know if you looked at your autonomic balance. I mean, I guess it's going to be pretty sympathetic at that point, and or sometimes overly parasympathetic. I found that sleep quality can actually suffer there too.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not always that I'm nicely parasympathetic, I'm going to sleep great. Maybe not.
Yep, and as we always say, avoid training on days that you're actually traveling,
Yeah,
as the
yeah.
traveling itself tends to be a stressful
Pretty,
event.
yeah, yeah. And you see the imprint of it on people's scores almost always.
Yep, yep. Cool. Well, Scott,
Yeah,
I don't want to keep you any longer. It's beautiful out there, and I think you got some more riding
yeah.
to do.
I'm gonna get started here. Actually, I haven't started yet. We just got here, so
Perfect.
got the whole cruise here now. So
Oh, man.
all
All
right,
right. Well,
Sean.
that's great. Well, I'm Sean LaFlock. You can get me at SeanAcrossTheDelryBeach.com.
I'm Scott Hagness. You get me at Scott at CrossFitPortland.com.
Awesome, Scotty. Enjoy the ride.
I will. All right, Sean. Talk to you later.
Talk to you later.